This is The Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this program continues to provide legal information, relevant examples, and practical assistance to help you with the law matters because the law matters. A better understanding of the law puts you in a better position to understand how to protect yourself, your family, and your business at times. As we present various topics, you may decide to handle some issues yourself, and we try to help with that. If you do decide to enlist professionals, our goal is to help you be better prepared, and so will the professional that you select. As always, our goal is to help you save time, money, and achieve the best possible results. Again, we want to welcome and thank our attorney, David Bazar, from the Bazar and Associates law firm, who continues to weigh in on the various topics that we discuss. And at this point, it's New Year, many New Year's resolutions, some of which are, let's start a business. So today our topic is the essentials of business. Many entrepreneurs start a new business to follow their dreams and to fulfill their passions, and it certainly can be. It puts you in charge. Of course, our position is to try to help you do it right. Starting a business from scratch can be very exciting, also very challenging. So we're here to help. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that maybe you didn't even think to ask. Personal protection, taxes, intellectual property, various topics, including the structure of the business at the outset. First, let's give you a little bit of update. 2022 business by the numbers. Right now, there are 33.2 million small businesses in the U.S., composing 99.9% of all American businesses, according to the Small Business Administration and their statistics right now as of 2023. The 2022 SBA Small Business Profile found more small businesses opened than closed, which is encouraging. A recent Gallup poll also found that 68% of Americans are confident in small businesses more than any other institution, including the police and military. Perhaps not surprising. 65.3% of small businesses are currently profitable, which is encouraging. And small businesses provide 46.8% of private workforce employment, and it has been the economy's backbone for COVID-19 recovery. We hope that that's helpful in setting the stage for you are starting a new business or you're thinking about it. So here we are to provide legal information. I suppose a very logical question is, do people really need to have a lawyer to start a new business, and where might you fit in best?
So an accountant and a lawyer can be helpful in deciding what structure the business should have in terms of both taxation and liability protection. Can you do a lot of it or some of it yourself? You can. Best to have advice, I always say that, and perhaps you can consult and then go do some of it yourself. Both the Secretary of State in Rhode Island, Secretary of Commonwealth in Massachusetts have websites that do walk you through a lot of what you need to know in starting a business. It doesn't give you any legal advice, it doesn't give you any tax advice, but it gives you some ability to be able to create some of the documents yourself and give you a guideline or suggested path on some of the other issues that you might face.
It's interesting. So at times I help people start businesses, and many of them I help with marketing plans as well as business plans. And small business owners today, when they jump in, they also often say, I have a great idea, and I'm willing to do everything, which of course doesn't always work. You can work on the business, in the business. It's difficult if you are spread so thin that you can't do both as effectively as you should or might. But when someone's starting out, they might think of what we know as a sole proprietorship. What are some of the advantages or disadvantages of doing that, David?
Well, an advantage of starting with a sole proprietorship is it's easy. You just open your doors. The disadvantage is everything you do is going to be taxed to you, which may be okay. That's an accounting question. There's going to be personal liability for everything you do because there's no corporate structure, either liability, a limited liability company, LLC commonly called, or a corporate shield from a corporation that would perhaps be appropriate. But you can protect yourself with insurance and some other things. It won't protect you against contracts or anything else, leases that you have to sign, because if you are a sole proprietor, you're going to be signing those personally. So that's part of the downside of it.
When someone is thinking about starting a business, and many do in their own home, would you generally advise that they not maintain a sole proprietorship? Because if people are coming in and out of their home and there isn't that division between what is me and my business and what is me and my home and family life, do you see that as a major concern as opposed to those who just do and everything online?
So I don't like the idea of using a home for having people come in for business purposes. You're better off somewhere else where you can have separate insurance to cover that. I am unsure, I'm not an insurance agent, as to what exclusions might be in homeowners insurance for coverage for somebody who gets hurt in your home. I'm not sure if you can add an umbrella or a rider or some such thing. You contact your insurance agent to find that out. So there's some concern about doing business in your home, whether you have an LLC or a corporation or not. But all that said, anytime anyone is starting a business or going to be in business where there's going to be interaction with the public or contracts that might be entered into or any of those types of things, I still recommend some corporate protection.
Okay, and if we've moved from sole proprietorship to considering LLC, LLP, or even the S Corp or C Corp, could you review those for us?
So the difference between an S Corp and a C Corp is the taxation and how it's treated by the IRS and how you're treated by the IRS. One passes through the S Corporation, can pass directly through the taxes to you. A C Corporation is taxed at the corporate level, and then anything you take out for profits is taxed as dividends. It's often said double taxation on that situation. There are certain things that are an advantage to a C Corporation, and there are things that are an advantage to an S Corporation. Many of those questions can be answered by an accountant. Retirement plans, that type of thing. Another thing to consider, though, is, as you mentioned, LLCs, which is another form of corporate protection, and it gives you the option to pick how you want to be taxed. Disregard the entity if it's just you. That's sort of like a sole proprietorship. It could be tax me or as partnership, so that if there's more than one owner, it passes to the people who are members of the LLC, or it could be taxed as a corporation.
Would a lawyer be in a better position to suggest whether it should be an LLC or an LLP?
Well,
or is that just something that accountant, you'd suggest they handle that?
Well, the tax part of it is an accountant, but there's other things to consider when you're forming the company, where you are in the stage of growth of your company, whether or not you're going to be looking for outside investors in your company, whether or not, if there's going to be a number of outside investors over time, you might be better off with a stock company, a regular corporation, so that you have stock in the treasury of the corporation to sell to investors. Different considerations of that. And how many people at the start of the corporation are involved. If it's just you and you're not expecting a lot of other people, that is going to factor into what structure you want to take. If you have partners, then there's a different consideration as to, do you want an LLC with an operating agreement that lays out what everybody's responsibilities and rights are and duties? Do you want a corporation with a president and a board of directors and that kind of governance? So yeah, I would contact and speak to and get advice from an attorney. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to hire them to put it in place, although I would recommend that too. But it's at least a good idea. Have a consultation, talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer, and then figure out what structure is best for you.
And while I mentioned entrepreneurship at the top of the segment, some people might say, well, I have a friend who is going to help me. I make the thing, they will do the sales, or they will do the marketing portion of it. So they think about having a partnership. Sounds like a nice idea because this person and myself have been friends for years. Does sound good. Before someone thinks about going into business with their friend and does think about doing a partnership, from the lawyer's perspective, give us some information about how you should do, never mind whether or not you should do that, but how you should do this if you were thinking about it, knowing you have all good intentions at the outset.
So if you have two friends going into business together,
Yes.
then really want to have either a partnership agreement or an LLC with an operating agreement or a corporation with other types of agreements in the corporation, such as a buy-sell agreement or some idea of whose roles and responsibilities and duties are assigned to each partner. And the importance of that is if your friends going in, you really would hope to be friends coming out, and
Yes.
put it in writing. As you always say, get it in writing. And so if you put your rights and duties and obligations and liabilities and all of that in writing, then it's better chance that you'll come out as friends than if you just go in with a handshake.
When two people are starting out with a business, they may have a concept of how it is going to be, how it's going to run, what it's going to do, and then it evolves. The next stage, who knows, whatever the next stage is, and there's a disagreement. How does working with a lawyer and having things in place, how will that help avoid problems?
Well, if you have it in writing as to what the next steps might be. Now, you can't cover every contingency, but you can cover in a broad sense all the likely outcomes. And what are the broad strokes of that? Well, one partner wants to leave or one member of the LLC wants to leave. You can have an exit strategy built into the operating agreement or the shareholders agreement, which says that this is how we'll value the corporation. This is what you'll get on death, if it's an exit by death. And you can also fund that with life insurance in many cases. This is what will happen. This is how we'll value the corporation if I voluntarily leave. So you try to cover those broad ideas with a structure that both sides agree to. Because if you agree to it going in, then you know going in this is going to be fair to both of you. And hopefully if you get to the other side of that, it's still going to be fair to both of you.
Good. Thank you for reviewing that, because I know I've spoken to people who started out as friends and then just didn't know how to have the thing evolve, and it caused complications that we've tried to help avoid. And if legally that can be done and afford safety and peace of mind to both, that's a good thing. So let's go to the basics. You're starting a business, you need to have a name for your business. Is that something someone should do on their own?
They can. There is a way to do that. Of course, a lawyer can do it for you, but you can go to, if it's Rhode Island, for example, the Secretary of State's website, and there's a place where you can search the name and see if it's already being used.
When someone starts out, and we know what a DBA, doing business as, is, what's the advantage of doing that? And is that what you should do when you're starting a bank account, which is something someone should do when they're starting a business, namely separate their bank's personal business and personal and business accounts?
So when you say DBA, are you talking about a situation where we have a sole proprietorship, no business?
No business.
And so we want to open up an account for the business and use the DBA on the checks, and the name of the business
Yes.
is on there so that when you pay bills, people know it's for this business. When you track the income coming in and the expenses going out, it's all out of the same account. It's a good idea to separate it in that situation.
Okay, so you've started a business, you have a name for the business, you have a bank account for the business. There's something called an EIN number. I don't know that anyone at the outset knows what that is, but who needs one?
A tax ID number. Certainly if you have a corporate structure or an LLC, you should get a tax ID number. That's the tax ID number for the company, because remember, the reason you get protection from liability with a company or an LLC is they're a separate entity. They're not you. So it's the entity that's liable for any of the claims against the company or any of the debts of the company. So it gets its own separate tax ID number because it is a separate entity. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean the profits are going to get taxed at the corporate level or the LLC level. That's the election that you make when you form the company. But a company needs its own tax ID number.
And for those who want to know how to get a tax ID number, not surprisingly, it's also something you can do online. taxid-us.com will help you with that process once you've started your bank account and have your name intact. When people start businesses, they often may be aware of what licenses or permits they have. Let's do a little review of that, David.
First of all, depending on the type of business, there are maybe several licenses you need to get from several different places. For example, if you're going to open a bar, you need a liquor license, and usually the city or town is the one that will issue that. There's going to be a permit to make sales at retail, perhaps, so you're going to need a tax sales permit so that you have the forms that you'll get to be able to remit the sales tax you collect to the state. There's perhaps licenses for the community that you're in, depending on the type of business you're in. So that's one aspect. What are the licenses I need to operate? There's also another aspect. If you are opening up a business in brick and mortar, as we say, and you're going to enter into a lease, besides all of the issues that go into the lease, you also want to make sure that where you're opening your business, it's zoned properly so that you can operate in that location. As you mentioned, operating out of your house, well, that's residential. You're not going to be able to operate many types of businesses out of your house where people do need to come in and out often. Certainly you can't probably operate a retail store out of your house because it's not zoned for that. So you also need to make sure the zoning is correct.
Okay. And as you mentioned, the brick and mortar, you're setting up a business in another city, town, or down the street. When you are thinking about taking over some space, is it wise for a person who wants to start a business to take that aspect on without a lawyer, namely the review of a lease and all of its terms? When does a lawyer come in to make a difference there that our viewers should know about?
There are so many things that go into a lease that I would always want to, at a minimum, have it reviewed by an attorney before you sign it, but after you maybe have negotiated and have a draft of it. So the easy things, or common sense things, might be, what's the rent? How long a period of time do I have it for? Do I have an option to renew the lease? The things you might not think about is, who's responsible for the insurance? Who's responsible for the upkeep? Who's responsible for the snow removal, the trash removal? Who's responsible for the utilities? Who's responsible for the taxes? So there's a number of other issues that may go into that lease that you'd want an attorney to review.
And when someone is bringing other employees or independent contractors into their business, offsite or in a home, what kinds of things might you need a lawyer to review when you're entering into an arrangement with some outside labor?
So if you're bringing someone into your house to work in a business, one of the first things you might want a lawyer to do is to check the ordinances of the city or town you live in and see if you're even allowed to do that. Many cities and towns allow people to operate a home office out of their property, but the definition of a home office can be a little bit cloudy, so to speak. It's a home office, but is it still a home office if you have employees coming to your home? If you're operating a landscaping business, for example, can you keep the heavy equipment that you need for the landscaping in your residential property? Not always clear. Every city and town has its own ordinances, so maybe before you start a business out of your home, you might at least want to check what the ordinances are. And again, I would have an attorney do that because it's always possibly subject to some interpretation.
Good. And subject to interpretation also might be, am I a freelancer, an independent contractor, or am I actually an employee of that entity? What can a lawyer do to make sure to protect either one, either side, or both sides?
So remember, if it's an employee, first of all, now you have to have workers' compensation insurance as a requirement. And then what's the definition of an employee? What kind of control do you have? Do you control their hours, where they go, where they work? Do they bring their own tools to the job? Do you supply the tools? So there's a lot of things that go into that. So you should have a lawyer, first of all, review it And secondly, probably if it is an independent contractor, have the lawyer draft some kind of agreement between the parties that indicates that both parties agree that the work being done is being done by an independent contractor.
And we do this to help people avoid having problems down the road. And of course, since the gig economy and since COVID, the nature of how people work has changed drastically. So something
Right.
worthwhile to pay attention to. Small businesses just starting out, they're making sales, they're buying things from vendors. So the contracts, what kinds of help should we look to a lawyer to keep us safe from?
Yeah, so there's a lot, and there's a lot of different things that you need to be aware of. First of all, if you have a business and you can get this done, you want the business, the corporation, I shouldn't say business because there's many different forms of a business, the corporation of the LLC to be the entity to sign the agreement, the contract, because you don't want the personal liability. So the first thing you might want to do is have a lawyer look at it and make sure there's no personal liability in the language in the lease or on what you sign. And if you're signing it for the corporation as an officer, sign it as an officer, president. If it's as a member of, or manager of an LLC, sign it in that capacity so it's clear you're signing in the capacity for the corporation or the LLC. Second thing you want to look at are what are the terms of the contract, and many times the small print. Now, the small print is an issue that you could do a whole show on, and what is negotiable and what not negotiable. Who are you dealing with? Are you setting up a business where you need internet and you're dealing with Cox or Verizon and they have you sign things? I'm not sure that a lawyer is going to be able to negotiate to change the language in some of those things, but at least the lawyer could explain to you what they are. Another area to think about and where there can be issues is credit card agreements. When you enter into an agreement with a company providing credit card services, it might be a good idea to have a lawyer look at that agreement and say, what are the requirements of it? What do you have to pay? And more importantly, if you want to change, what are the exit fees, if there are any?
And when someone is selling material, what kinds of concerns might there be relative to you're making good on something that isn't done properly, whether or not you've been paid, what your recourse is, how you negotiate, whether you have to have something mediated? What about those kinds of issues? Or is that something that we generally don't have to worry about at this point?
Some agreements have requirements for arbitration or mediation in them, and you really would like to look at that if you have any leverage to negotiate, because sometimes they say, before you can sue us, we have to go to arbitration, and you have to do it in Texas or wherever they are. So that's something to at least know about and look at, and if it's subject to some negotiation, great. You were talking about materials and so forth, and I'm not sure if you were referring to if you buy something or someone comes and does work in a mechanics lien issue, or if you were talking about buying, for example, merchandise that you're going to sell, and what do you need to know about paying for it? Is it cash on delivery? Do you get terms? Those types of things. Those are agreements that you enter into with the vendor. And again, as long as you understand all the terms and language in there, I'd still have it reviewed by an attorney to find out what the things are in there that you don't see or know.
Sounds good. How about those who are starting out, say, as a hobby, and then they decide they're going to turn it into a bona fide business? So they make a product. And as that grows, maybe they sell more products. Now, as it becomes more of a bona fide, viable business, what happens to the product liability, disclaimers? When do you know that you need to have a lawyer to cover these issues?
So products liability, if you're buying a product from somebody else and then selling it, you're going to be in the line with everybody else, the supply chain, as we have heard a lot about recently, for liability. So if you sell a defective product that's made by someone else, they're going to sue you. They should sue the manufacturer or the middleman if there was one who sold it to you. And if you can, if you're in a position to do it, you should have some contract with whoever's supplying it that they're responsible for any defective product they sell. If you can get that, you should also have your own liability insurance and have a good agent that covers you so that you know no matter what you're sued for, it's not excluded.
Okay, and if you're making the thing, you're not buying it, reselling it, or adding some value to it and reselling it. I don't know, for example, perhaps you're making candles. There's discussion now about what harm they could possibly do, whether used properly or improperly, or whether someone has some allergies to it. How deep and how wide and when do we really need to have a lawyer about things such as a simple candle?
What you need before a lawyer is a good insurance agent to make sure you have coverage, liability coverage for any possibility. You know, if the candle falls down and burns down the house, you might want to have, well, if you have a good insurance guy, agent who gets you good insurance, the insurance company will then defend you and hire the lawyer, but then the lawyer can come in and say, you know, candles are known to burn, that's why you light them on fire, and if you haven't used it correctly, it might be your problem, not the manufacturer's problem.
Okay. If you are making a product and it's a new product, you want some protection for it. Most lawyers can cover business, broad brush strokes. How and when do you know you need to entertain an intellectual property lawyer, for example?
So if you have something that you think can be patented or trademarked or copyrighted, depending on the type of thing it is that you have, I would contact an attorney that specializes in intellectual property and make an appointment, bring it in, and get their advice, because that is a specialty. There's a process for doing it. And if that is your product, before you put it out in the market or as you're putting it out in the market, you need to have some advice as to what you can do to protect it.
And I guess I should have mentioned too, for some people who think they have a new invention, but it really isn't a new invention, there's value in researching through the patent office whether or not what you have really is something that you should be able to manufacture without infringing on someone else's protected rights as well.
And you can have a consultation with an intellectual property lawyer who can do that for you.
And in the brief amount of time that we have left, so you mentioned consulting with an accountant, maybe even an intellectual property lawyer, if that's what's necessary. How does it work? Do you come together all at once, or is it likely that someone can stage accountant, lawyer, or lawyer, accountant, and then intellectual property person?
It doesn't matter which order. Because if you go to the lawyer first and ask a lot of questions, and some of them are about taxes, they're going to say, well, you have to see the accountant for that. The accountant will tell you to see the lawyer. They can talk to each other, figure that out. So 3 things: accountant, lawyer, and insurance agent.
Insurance agent, maybe an intellectual property, maybe not.
If you need it.
We hope that this has been helpful to you if you are considering starting a business. We didn't get a chance to talk about franchise law. Perhaps we'll save that for another day. That certainly, too, might need a lawyer. Thank you for tuning in to The Law Matters. As we say, it matters to you.